Hi, good evening. I'm Professor David King from the Kennedy School of Government. I want to welcome all of you to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. Tonight, we have the honor of hosting a Washington institution. To hear an overview tonight of the political scene in Washington, D.C. from our guest this evening is like getting hidden instruction from Ted Williams. Or since he's such a big University of Maryland basketball fan, hearing from our guest tonight is like getting coaching instruction from Maryland basketball coach Cary Williams. Our speaker joins a long line of award-winning journalists we've had recently in the forum, including Seymour Hersh, Linda Greenhouse, Tom Brokaw, Judy Woodruff, Ted Koppel, and so on. As you know, to many people, journalism has a special role in a free society. Some call it the oxygen of democracy. But then we hear people often say, what in the world are you talking about, the oxygen of democracy? Because in polls, voters complain that journalists can't be trusted. It's nothing more than car chases and crime scenes, sex stories, and sensationalism. If it bleeds, it leads, they believe. But journalism is more than that in a democracy. It always has been. And if you don't believe me, here's what a famous monarch had to say about the press. Napoleon Bonaparte said, 4 hostile newspapers are more to be feared than 1,000 bayonets. Tonight's guest, a force in Washington politics, has proven that the pen is mightier than the sword. He is, of course, one of our most prominent, influential, and some say controversial political journalists from the right, and we're pleased tonight to be able to host him in the forum. I'd like to begin, though, by introducing our guest, our own Lynn Sweet. Lynn Sweet is a fellow here at the Institute of Politics this semester. She's also the Washington bureau chief of the Chicago Sun-Times, and she's been hosting outstanding speakers throughout the semester, both in her study group and here in the forum. Ladies and gentlemen, journalist and IOP fellow, Lynn Sweet.
Dave, thank you for your more than generous introduction, and good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. It is my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Robert Novak. He's a syndicated columnist whose home paper is mine, the Chicago Sun-Times. Bob is known for his shoe leather reporting, whether in his column or on CNN, where he is a star of Crossfire and the Capitol Gang. Novak last year celebrated 40 years of column writing. Now, that's an enterprise that started on May 15, 1963, with the late Roland Evans. Of his first column, Novak wrote on his anniversary last year, open quote, It raised eyebrows because of its improbable content. Bob's reporting today is very much the kind of reporting that still raises eyebrows. Bob started his journalism career in his native Illinois. Raised in Joliet, his first newspaper job happened when he was still 16 and in high school at the Joliet Herald News. When he went on to college at the University of Illinois, he continued reporting for the Joliet paper as well as the Champaign-Urbana News Courier. Still a fighting Illini, Novak remains connected to that university very much. He has an honorary doctorate from the university, and if you often see Bob wearing a blue and orange tie on television, you now know why. More in brief. Novak was a lieutenant in the United States Army during Korea. After that, he worked for the Associated Press in Nebraska, then Indianapolis, then Washington. From AP, Bob joined the Wall Street Journal in Washington, where he covered D.C. politics and government until he teamed with Evans in 1961. The Novaks and Evans column laid down a rule for themselves, which is still a hallmark of the work today that Bob does, and indeed an inspiration and a personal goal for me in my work. Novak has written that at the start of his spectacular run, which goes on to this day, uninterrupted, that the partners were, quote, determined that every one of our columns would contain at least one previously unpublished fact, not just an outpouring of opinion. That he does. Ladies and gentlemen, our guest tonight, Bob Novak.
Thank you very much, Lynn, Professor. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the first time I have been back at the Kennedy School since 1991. And I used to go every year, and they stopped inviting me. And I believe what has happened is that all the people who were around to remember how loathsome I was are either dead or retired now. So they've asked me back, and I'm grateful for that. That was a very flattering and kind introduction, Lynn, but you left out the fact that in Washington, for the many years I have been there, 46 years, I've been known for much of that time as the Prince of Darkness. Why am I called the Prince of Darkness? It's because I believe in limited government, low taxes, and individual economic freedom. In Washington, those are very evil and vile beliefs to have. The other factor is that I am a believer in the glass being half empty rather than half full. I have never been a cheerleader. I don't do very good with pom-poms. And so I have not ever been considered someone that even some of my favorite Republican presidents were very fond of. I am supposed to speak about 20 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to questions. And so to make life more difficult for you, I'm going to give you, excuse me, I'm going to start off with 5 frequently asked questions, so you have to think of something a little bit harder than the ones that come straight to your mind. Frequently asked question number 1, will Dick Cheney be dumped off the Republican ticket? Not a chance of it. He is the prime minister in this government. He's the fellow who, with the brain power, the ability, and he is the most powerful vice president I have seen in my time in Washington. Frequently asked question number 2, will the junior senator from New York, Hillary Rodham Clinton, be on the Democratic ticket as vice president? Same answer, not a chance. Now, she would be most desired by the Republicans. They feel that that would really guarantee a Republican win. But you know, sometimes you get disappointed in being granted what you wished for, as the New York Republicans were when she ran for the Senate. But she's not going to be on the ticket this year. Frequently asked question number 3, how can you stand sitting on Crossfire across from James Carville night after night? Well, the first and easiest answer is that they pay me a lot of money to do it. But I also, sometimes when money isn't even enough and he is abusing me, I think of my dear friend, his wife, his Republican wife, Mary Madeline. She has to go to bed with him. I can just sit next to him, much easier. Frequently asked question number 4, is the Washington news media really as liberal as they're made out to be? And when somebody asks, are the news media in Washington liberal, it's really like asking, is Pope John Paul II really a Catholic? Think about that for a minute. Frequently asked question number 5, who was it in the administration, who were those 2 administration sources who told you that Ambassador Joe Wilson's wife was an employee of the CIA? Well, I have been told by my attorneys not to answer that question or any other question that you put to me about the CIA case. So in case you have come here with a big list of CIA leak questions, you're out of luck, folks, because I ain't going to answer any of them. Now, what I am going to talk about is the election coming up. It's less than 7 months away. If you read the Washington Post and the New York Times, you would think last week that the election was going to be next Tuesday. It is so frantic. The schedule has moved so far ahead. It is an election it is very close now. I can't predict the future, but all the odds are it's going to stay close because this country is not bitterly divided, but it's evenly divided between the blues and the reds. We almost had a dead heat in the popular vote and indeed in the electoral vote between Bush and Gore last time, and we have the same thing this time. We have the country divided into one group of 47% and another group of 47%. That only leaves about 6% in between, and I'll talk about that 6% a little bit later. But what is the difference? Did you go down in any community and there's one house Republican, one house Democrat? Not exactly. There are different characteristics of the blue voters and the red voters, the Gore voters, now the Cary voters, and the Bush voters. For example, a majority of non-Caucasian Americans voted for Gore and will vote for Cary. They are Democrats. A vast majority of African American voters, while on the other hand, a huge majority of white Caucasian males, white males, are Republicans. If you only had white men voting today, you would have had President Dole finishing up his second term. They are Republicans. Secondly, you have another breakdown between women who work outside the home, particularly single women who work outside the home, voting heavily Democratic, and the smaller number of women who don't work outside the home, voting substantially Republican. And then you have people who live in close proximity to each other, in crowded cities, in apartment buildings, in urban areas, voting essentially Democratic, while people who don't live very close to each other, out in the wide open spaces, in rural areas, tend to vote Republican. And then the greatest inflexible division is income. If you make less than $40,000 a year income, you are likely to vote Democratic. If you make more than $50,000 a year income, you are likely to vote Republican. And it is inflexible. Now, what are all these odd makeups and divisions? What do they amount to, actually? Well, I think what it is there are two kinds of Americans. One kind looks upon the government as something that is going to give them a helping hand. That this is a tough life, it is a dog-eat-dog out there, and these Americans think they need a little help, a little assistance from their government to get by. While there is another group, just about evenly divided, who says, I can make it on my own, I don't need the government, please get out of the way, Mr. Government, and let me go about my business. Or to put it in a cruder fashion, is the government the problem, or is it the solution? That's where this big voting groups boils down to 46 or 47% on each side. But what about the people in the middle? What kind of people are they? Are these the kind of people who can make up their mind between Coca-Cola and Pepsi? Are these the kind of people who have these swings in the polls where in one poll we have John Cary ahead 8 points, and in the same poll 2 weeks later we have George W. Bush ahead by 4 points? Yes, there is. These are the swing voters, and they are the people that the politicians really look upon, and try to influence. What are they influenced by? Most of all, they are influenced by the economy. James Carville in 1992 said it's the economy, stupid, and that is still the thing that, by any polling measurement, is the thing that influences most people, and particularly those people in the middle who can't make up their mind which way to go. Now, this is a real problem, ladies and gentlemen, for the Democrats coming up here, because no matter how you cut it, all the economic indicators are on the upside. The stock market, and there's a lot of people in the stock market today, is going up. Unemployment is going down. 300,000 new jobs last month. And of course, people got on the Senate floor, Democrats, and said, well, these were not the right kind of jobs. But nonetheless, all the indicators are coming up, and you have to convince people that things are not as good as you think. Democrats have to be the bad news bears, and that's a tough thing for any political party to have to deal with. The problem with Democrats on the economy is that it is very hard to sell the liberal line out in public. On Meet the Press 2 weeks ago, your Senator Teddy Kennedy, who I've known all my life, it seems like, known Andy since 1960, Teddy Kennedy was asked by Tim Russert. Tim said, you know, George W. Bush says he is a proud conservative. Are you a proud liberal? And Teddy said, of course I am. And then he said, what about John Cary? Is he a proud liberal? And he said, well, he's got to speak for himself. Liberal is not a good word when you're trying to win elections, and coming out for higher taxes is not a good word when you're talking about trying to win elections. You have a situation where the Senator Cary and other Democrats are saying we are the real conservatives because we are for smaller deficits. You know, I have a kind of a thing in my mind of this kind of prototypical American couple sitting at the dining room table, Sam and Molly. Lyndon Johnson always used to talk about Sam and Molly, so it's good enough for Lyndon Johnson, it's good enough for me. I like to talk about them. And Sam says to Molly, Sam says, you know, Molly, I'm worried about this federal budget deficit. It's just something I can't sleep at night thinking about it. And Molly says, Sam, I'm glad you brought that up. That is something that really just burns my heart. That deficit is getting so big. Do you think that conversation ever took place anywhere at any time? People don't give a damn about the deficit. Ronald Reagan once said, he said, I don't worry about the budget deficit. It's big enough to take care of itself. And that may sound cynical, but that is exactly the truth and the fact of life in America today. Now, what you have then is a situation where the Republicans are the good news bears. They're talking about tax cuts. They're talking about a better economy. And unless you are in that solid Democratic position, that's not very good medicine for the Democrats. So what is the issue that can bring across the Democrats? And that is the war in Iraq. Is it another Vietnam, as Teddy Kennedy says? Or is it a skirmish that's going to be taken care of? You don't know, and I don't know. It is a situation where the president was convinced by a lot of advisors in and outside of the government that the way to fight the war on terrorism was preemptive strikes against governments that he did not like or that were the axis of evil. You remember that phrase? I have in my course of my life morphed from a moderate Republican to a right-wing extremist. But let me tell you something now. I have never been for intervening around the world to make in very strange places of the Middle East and the Far East, replicas of the state of Iowa. I don't think that is a practical ambition for the United States or the United States military. The first time I went to Iraq, in the heyday of Saddam Hussein, about 21 years ago, I was ushered, as all journalists are, into the Ministry of Information waiting room, and there was murals all over the wall. And they were very interesting murals because they were Iraqis doing unspeakable things to British soldiers. They were cutting off their heads, they were bayoneting them, they were shooting them in the face, they were stabbing them. This is the look they wanted to give to the foreign journalists as they came in. And that brought me to my history book, where I began to look at the 1920 insurrection right after World War I, where the Iraqi citizens had a tremendous insurrection against the British. And in 2 years, they killed 33,000 British soldiers. You believe that? 33,000. They are buried in the so-called English cemetery in Baghdad. I knew these are people that are really tough to mess around with. Now, just as a footnote, I wonder how in the world it was possible for the British to get away with losing 33,000 men in 2 years at the other side of the world. And not until recently did I find out that most of those murdered British soldiers were from India. They were Sikhs and Gurkhas. And the answer is that if you're going to be a colonial power, it's much better to fuel your wars with colonial troops rather than people from the home front. But we don't have colonial troops, so we lose our own people. That is the danger for this administration. I believe, from my own standpoint, that the difficulty of pacifying Iraq has ended the policy of preemption, which I believe is good for America, and I think it's good for conservatives and good for Republicans. But whether this war continues and whether it is a war that is terminates in great leadership by the president and a victory, or we are indeed in a quagmire, may determine how that in-between vote votes in the final stages of this election. Let me just, before we end, give you my general views on, before I end, on the question of leadership in America. What is a president supposed to be? My two favorite presidents of the 20th century were Ronald Reagan and Calvin Coolidge. I think you'll be happy to hear that. Calvin Coolidge was from Massachusetts. You may have forgotten him, but I haven't. Now, what do they have in common? They were the only presidents of the 20th century who thought that government was the problem instead of the solution. The other thing they had in common is neither one of them ever could have been accused of being a workaholic. Neither one of them. Silent Cal, as he was called, was a Vermonter by birth and very meticulous. He kept a record of his activities every day. And when he was in the White House, he would take a substantial nap in the afternoon, as well as sleeping a hell of a lot at night. And in fact, according to his journal, some days out of 24 hours, he would sleep 13 while he was president of the United States. Now, President Reagan didn't keep those meticulous records, but nobody saw him around much before 9 in the morning or after 5 in the afternoon. And the notion, Ronald Reagan once said to, addressing a a club called the Gridiron Club, which Lynn Sweet and I both belong to, newspaper person's club. When he was president, he said, I once heard President Reagan said that hard work never hurt anybody, but I sure didn't want to take a chance on it. Now, as a matter of fact, I have seen presidents who worked very hard, burned the midnight oil, Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, Jimmy Carter. Between the three of them, I think they damn near wrecked the country. And I really do believe that a president has never hurt the country when he's making Z's in the White House bedroom. There's not much damage he can do. And so I really do believe that this is a leadership job. It is not a chief executive's job. It is not an administrator's job. And that is what essentially, after everything is said, is a test of leadership in the economy, in the world, and how he is leading this diverse and great nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We move now to you. We have 4 microphones, 2 on the first floor and 1 on this side and 1 here. Approach the microphone. Please tell us where you're from, where you are in school, and remember to ask a question, don't make a speech, and we'll try and move through as many questions as we can quickly, and we'll begin over here.
Hi, my name is Betsy Sykes. I'm a senior at the college and going to work for the Bush-Cheney re-election campaign after I graduate. But there have been a lot of recent attacks on the conservative intellectuals in this country, I think, and whether it's the professor at Duke's assertion that he doesn't hire conservatives because they're stupid, or David Kay was here last week, and he characterized the Bush administration by saying that there's no intellectual curiosity in the administration. I was wondering if you could comment on Kay's assertion and sort of who you think the dominant intellectual conservative thinkers are of our day.
The dominant conservative intellectual thinkers. That's a good question. Who are the dominant intellectual thinkers of our day? I'm trying to think of some liberal intellectual thinkers. I don't know if I run across too many intellectuals. I'm a political reporter, and we don't find too many intellectuals in politics. I think the great the conservative intellectual of our time was Milton Friedman, and he's still around, still active on school choice and a few other things. But he was the person who said that less government is better and lower taxes are better. I think when you find people saying there's not much intellectual curiosity in the Bush administration, I think that's true of all administrations. This isn't a game of intellectual curiosity; it's a game of political power. I think the positions on the main domestic issues between the parties have never been so clearly laid out on who is for lower taxes, who is for higher taxes, who is for more regulation, who is for less regulation, and I don't think that intellectual curiosity has much to do with it.
Okay, go around the room up here.
My name is Connor Wilson. I'm a freshman in the college. 2 questions for you, actually. First of all, what do you feel will be the course of the election with Cary and Bush so close, neck and neck at this point? As you said, 7 months prior to the election. Do you think it's going to fizzle out, get more intense, wax or wane? And second question, how does it feel to see Carville in old school?
In old school.
With Will Ferrell, by any chance? Forget the second question then.
I don't go to many movies, and so I didn't even know what old school was. Carville's all right. He's just, Carville is part of the American dream. When he met When he met Bill Clinton, he had never made more than $60,000 in any year, and now he's a multimillionaire. So that's what makes America great. It's a terrific country. As to for your first question, who's going to win the election? I don't know who's going to win this election. That's what makes it a lot of fun for a political reporter, because they're going to spend millions and millions of dollars. They're going to put tremendous effort out, and they're going to just be slashing away at each other. Why would they attack each other the way they do? Because it works. They have really pushed up John Kerry's negatives. They had pushed up Bush's negatives during the primary season. So this is going to be a vile, vicious campaign. And if you don't like it, you better go to Haiti or someplace like that.
Good evening, sir. My name is Leif Dorms-Joe. I'm a first-year student at the Kennedy School. I thought you were being a bit generous when you described your worldview as seeing the glass half full. I've seen your commentary over a decade, and from what I can gather, you see the glass is completely empty. I wondered if you ever contemplated whether the brand of pessimism that you and other commentators preach has a corrosive effect on people's trust in government, whether it breeds suspicion in others, and whether it handicaps our ability as a people to work together.
Well, I certainly hope so. When I gave my commencement address at the University of Illinois a few years ago, my alma mater, and they were kind enough to give me an honorary doctorate, I said, always love your country, but never trust your government. And that I think is very deep in the American mind. If you read Tom Paine, if you read Patrick Henry, if you read the Patriots, they didn't like government much, and they established a government of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia that was not intended to work. Nothing was supposed to happen, and if you watch the Senate today, they pretty damn well succeeded. So I'm not. I take no apologies for not being for good government. That's the half empty. The reason I say it's half full is I do have great faith in the American people, and I do believe that if you get the government off their back, particularly every time you reduce taxes, there's more activity, there's more entrepreneurship, more ingenuity. So I'm not a pessimist. I'm a cynic when it comes to government, but I am an optimist and idealist when it comes to the American people.
Good evening. My name is Herman Sood. I'm at the Mass General at the medical school. I would like to ask you, since you didn't make any reference to it, whether or not in your qualifications for the president, whether or not there should be any truthfulness or honesty. And one of the reasons I asked this question today is that there has been so much talk by our president about the desire to bring freedom and democracy to Iraq. And I know that now we have planned to build 114 bases in Iraq, and that the Iraqi army will report to General Sanchez, that Bremer has put in the end of March policies which will make it irrevocable the commitments that are made to foreign global firms to do business and to have access to the natural resources of Iraq. And this does not seem to me to accord in the most remote way with a desire to have a free, independent, democratic Iraq.
Well, I don't think your information is accurate. I think all of that is subject to a considerable amount of debate. I think our position in Iraq right now is that the idea of us making any kind of economic gain out of it is remote. We're trying to get out with our behinds intact, to be blunt about it. The idea that this is going to be a positive economic thing for the United States is not true. I think the president does. I think I have a great deal of question whether it's the role of the United States to go around the world trying to create lots of little states in our image. I don't think it's realistic. I think this was the difficulty we have had in Iraq has been something that has cooled us off considerably, but I do believe that it was sincere by the president in the first place.
I would just comment that my reference is from the Guardian newspaper, and I don't know that they're reputed to be wildly inaccurate.
They often are, sir. I hate to disillusion you.
Very good.
Ms. Novak, my name is Jim Downey. I'm a National Security Fellow here for a year and also a graduate of the University of Illinois.
Go Illini.
Go Illini, that's right. I was going to ask one question, but I've actually decided to jump to a different one. It has to do with the income numbers that you mentioned. As I've been here for about a year waiting for the bus pretty much every day to ride down from where I'm living, I notice a lot of Volvos, BMWs, Audis, et cetera, with first Dean stickers on them and now Cary stickers, which seems to contradict somewhat your notion about $50,000 and above. So I'm wondering if that income thing has some regional aspects to it that would make it more common for high-income folks to be more liberal in this area, for instance.
Well, you certainly can't draw conclusions from the People's Republic of Massachusetts. I mean, it's going to be considerably different than other places. There are limousine liberals, of course, but I hate to disillusion some of you, but there are some Bush voters out there. You know, we know that the very poor are going to vote Democratic, and you're saying all the rich are going to vote Democratic. That means everybody votes Democratic, but that isn't the case. I take my position from the exit polls of 2000, and the exit polls of 2000 show very clearly that people making less than $40,000, there was about very close to 60% voted for Gore. People making between $40,000 and $50,000 was just about even. And people over $50,000, it was about 58% Republican. So there is definitely an income bias based on statistical averages, and it stands to reason. I do believe that you find some rich liberals in Beverly Hills, in Newton, in Long Island, and but if you go all over the country, including places where people don't live too close to each other, as I mentioned, I think you'll find that the richer people are, the more they have to protect, and the more likely they're going to vote Republican.
Hi, my name is Betsy Madison. I'm 19 from Saginaw, Michigan, and I currently serve on an AmeriCorps program called City Year. I believe that carrying a gun is not the only way that a citizen of the United States can serve his or her country. I'm interested in programs like AmeriCorps, and I wonder what your vision is for the future of national service.
Well, I believe in national service. I really do believe in volunteer service. I don't believe volunteers have to be paid by the federal government. I believe that the problem of saying that you can't volunteer, you can't give part of your life to serving your fellow man unless you get a stipend from the federal government is a Clintonian twist to what I think is a desirable and idealistic proposal. So I am not too keen on the government program, but I am very keen on private service. I do believe that we all owe something, whatever we can contribute, to helping our fellow men and women. And I certainly have done it. My wife has done it. And I believe that the idea that you can't do it unless you get a stipend from the government, I think turns the whole concept on its head.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name's John Jernigan. I'm a sophomore at the college. You spoke a little bit about the constituency in the United States that's interested in limited government, but you focus mainly on kind of limiting the government's role in economics. And I was interested on your perspective on the government's role in the social life of America, particularly Bush's proposal for amendment defining marriage between a man and a woman. And perhaps Sam and Molly's concern is not about the deficit per se, but the signaling, or the spending rather, that it signals. So if you could just speak to whether or not the Republicans are alienating the kind of libertarian constituency of the Republican Party.
Well, to end up with your final question, the libertarians are a very interesting bunch of people because you find all kinds of libertarians. You find the libertarians who are absolutely against any defense spending. You find libertarians who are pro-choice. You find libertarians who are pro-life. So there's not a pope, a libertarian pope somewhere who is putting down edicts on it. The question that you asked about whether there's less government or more government on the question of gay marriage, I don't believe that's a question of less government or more government. It's a question of the government's decision. When the mayor of San Francisco said that gay marriage is acceptable no matter what the churches say, was that less government or more government? When you have a constitutional amendment in Nebraska saying that there shouldn't be gay marriages, are more government or less government? I believe that is just a decision that is made. Marriage has always, through all of history, been a governmental function. I am not an anarchist. I don't believe there should be no government, and that certainly that the government has always had a major role in saying what constitutes marriage. In all societies, it's a question now in this society what legal marriage, which shall constitute legal marriage, and that is being argued out in the political sphere. It will be essentially a political decision in the long run, going through the courts, through constitutional amendments, and through legislatures.
My name is Krishna Guha. I'm a mid-career student here at the Kennedy School. I wanted to ask you that about Cary's choice of a running mate. From the Republican perspective, who would be the most dangerous opponent to face in that role?
Who would be the most dangerous?
Yes.
Well, I would think the best he could pick, somebody who is witty, intelligent, dedicated, diverse, would be Al Sharpton. Oh, you mean you don't want Al Sharpton? Oh. Let me tell you something about vice presidents, if I could, a little reality. I've been covering presidential elections since 1960, and the only vice presidential candidate I ever saw in any significant way help or hurt a ticket was Lyndon Johnson in 1960, who elected Jack Kennedy. Not because he was a lovely person, he wasn't. Not because he was popular, he wasn't. Not because he was interesting or articulate, he wasn't. But he brought the electoral votes of Texas and 2 or 3 other southern states. That is the only vice president I have ever seen that had any impact one way or the other. Vice presidents like Dan Quayle, maybe the worst vice presidential candidate I ever saw, didn't hurt Bush from getting elected in '88. Joe Lieberman, a lovely person, didn't help Al Gore one bit. So the question is, some of the realists in the Cary campaign are saying, we want somebody who brings electoral votes to the ticket. Who can bring electoral votes to the ticket? Would it be one of the 2 senators from Florida, 24 electoral votes, hanging in the balance right now? Bob Graham, senior senator, Bill Nelson, junior senator. Those are the candidates who scare the Republicans, not because they're brilliant or articulate or popular, but because they might carry Florida's electoral votes.
Thank you.
My name is Stephanie Kendall, and I'm a member of the Harvard Republican Club. And actually, you just hit on the point I was going to ask you about, and if you could talk about this a little bit more. What will it take for Bush or Cary to win Florida besides just the choice of a good running mate that is from there?
Well, in Florida, they bounce around in the polls so much, they don't know what they want. And I don't know what it's going to take. The Mason-Dixon poll, which has a good track record, the Democrats sneer at it, but they showed a 10-point swing in the last 2 weeks in favor of Bush. And the negatives in Florida from the Mason-Dixon poll for over a 2-week span, the negatives for Cary doubled from 21% to 42%. I've never seen negatives go up so high, and it's because of all these negative TV ads. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of old people, a lot of geezers. I can say that. I'm 73 years old, so I can say there's a lot of people in Florida who sit around watching CNN and reading the New York Times, and they think about things, and they slip from one side to the other. But I do believe that it's going to be very difficult for George W. Bush to be elected President of the United States without carrying Florida. I think Cary could miss and still get elected, but I think Bush must carry Florida, so it's very important for the Republicans.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michael Listman. I'm a student at the Graduate School of Education, and I've recently been trying to listen more to conservative talk radio. I'm a self-admitted liberal, so I've been trying to just hear it out and with an open mind hear the arguments, and I've been having a lot of trouble taking their rhetoric seriously, even with the open mind I've tried to employ. And I'm wondering what conservatives in Washington or in power in general consider, how they consider these arguments from these personalities, and how they take this rhetoric. Is it something they take seriously? Is it something they, behind closed doors, say, oh, they're kind of crazy? Or is it something that they really support?
Well, it's entertainment. I mean, I know liberals don't want to say entertainment's important, but unless it's MTV. But it's being entertained. You listen to Rush Limbaugh because he's a really entertaining guy. I'm not sure Al Franken is very entertaining. You know, you say, oh boy, he's got it right, but I don't know if he really is. You have much fun with him. So it's an entertainment thing. I don't think that many of the arguments on talk radio are taken too seriously. Of course, he is preaching to the choir. All the talk radio people, they're not trying to convert people. They're trying to titillate the people on their own side. But I don't believe that many of the things that are said are really taken that seriously.
Greg Wilson, I work here at the Kennedy School. Go Terps. I have a question basically on philosophy. The 20th century is a pretty remarkable century for the liberal side of the political spectrum. Prior to Franklin Roosevelt, labor unions didn't have the right to organize. There wasn't an environmental protection agency. Blacks didn't have federal protection to vote. When Kennedy became president, Medicare was passed, so seniors weren't left destitute and poor. So there's been a rather strong record on the liberal side in improving our way of life, the American way of life. I was interested in finding out what happened when you were in school. Did you have a teacher? Was there somebody that said to you that the federal government was a force, a negative force? Because it seems that the 20th century is pretty clear that it's been a positive force in giving us a very high standard of living that the world really admires.
Well, the question of whether the federal government gave us this high standard of living or the American capitalistic economic system gave us the high standard of living is questionable. All the things you mentioned, all the welfare state that you applaud, we have all of that in the destitute countries of sub-Saharan Africa, of Latin America. If you want to talk about big government and all those programs, we're deficient. The European states are lagging behind us in growth, and they have a lot more of these programs than we do. So I'm not sure that it is government that has created this. What Ronald Reagan quoted from Governor Winthrop of saying the city on the hill here in Massachusetts Bay Colony. So now, as far as my teachers go, I did not come out of the University of Illinois I came as an ardent conservative by any means. First, I did vote for Eisenhower, but voted for John F. Kennedy, voted for Lyndon Johnson. So I was a long way from being, but I have either it's either my sorrow or my good fortune. I've spent my whole life in Washington. I watch these people. I don't sit up here at Harvard and look at them from afar, and I see how corrupt they are, how incompetent they are, how they waste the taxpayers' dollar, how things could be managed much better, how our schools are, we're spending more and more on our schools than ever before, and they're worse than they were before. So I really do believe that my feeling that government is the problem comes from no professor, nothing professor to insult the professorial influence, but from my personal experience in watching government in Washington.
I want to let you know we have 2 more questions on the front row here.
My name is Catherine Bourne. I work for the National Security Program here at the Kennedy School. I know you said you wouldn't reveal your sources as to the Valerie Plame affair, but I'm wondering if you could tell us why you chose to disclose her identity.
You didn't hear what I said. I said I wouldn't answer any questions on that, on the advice of my counsel. This story is going to break someday, and I'll answer all your questions. Invite me back, and we'll have a CIA thing.
My name is James Bone, recent alumni of the doctoral program. When I was in Arizona over the Christmas holidays, I noticed that in a Democratic primary preference poll that Senator Cary was at about 6% among Democrats. And given that Senator Cary is largely unknown to the people nationally who would be his base, and he really kind of came to the nomination very abruptly, do you think that over the long run that Senator Cary is going to be able to connect with core Democrats, or is his appeal going to remain mostly that he can beat Bush and that's about it?
The Cary situation is very, very interesting because he had been given up as one of the living dead. That he was not merely trailing Dean; he was trailing everybody. He was running 3rd or 4th in New Hampshire, next to his home state. He's running 3rd or 4th in Iowa, and what happened to him was mostly the collapse of Howard Dean. Suddenly, people began to look at Howard Dean, and of course they were helped along by some negative commercials, some negative advertisements by his fellow Democrats, and they looked at him as somebody who said that we were not safer because Saddam Hussein was captured, that the one thing we had to do was give Osama bin Laden a fair trial, that he said that he changed churches because of he had an argument over bike paths in the Episcopalian Church. He said that the book of Job was in the New Testament, even though he read the Bible every day. That he was what he was a very odd little fellow from Vermont, and he wasn't qualified to be president. And suddenly there was this huge gaping hole in the Democratic front runner spot. And who were they going to put in it? And they put in John Cary, almost by a process of elimination. If we had had an old-fashioned calendar where you stretch out these nominations, I don't think John Cary would have made it. If you stretched out these things and John Edwards had a chance, I think Edwards would have probably been nominated. Edwards is a very engaging fellow. He is a trial lawyer. He could make you think that your mother was your son. He is absolutely a spellbinder. He is fabulous. And you know the thing about John Cary, he isn't a barrel of laughs. The only thing I ever heard about him, joke I ever heard about him, was a guy, John Cary walks in the bar, bartender says, "Why the long face, Senator?" You know, that's the only thing I've heard. But so that is the reason we have had this tremendous rise in his negatives, is that Bush is really piling it on to him. And he can say that's unfair. But what they're doing is they're introducing him to the American people in the most negative way they can. So it remains to be seen. But let me just begin where I began, that most of the people have made up their mind. I dare say, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, that most of the people in this audience know who you're going to vote for. You're not shopping. And there are very few people who are shopping, and those are the people that these things are important to. Just if I could say a final word, I do believe that this country has prospered and really done well in spite of our political leaders and not because of them. I think this is just an amazing, amazing country. My father's father was a deserter from the Tsarist army. He served 5 years. Ended up as making tractors at the John Deere factory in Moline. Sent 4 sons to the University of Illinois. My mother's father was a deserter from the army in Lithuania, from the Tsarist army. Ended up as a peddler in Pennsylvania. And these are the kind of people who came to this country by choice because they wanted to, because they wanted to get away. And they have made a country that is the envy of the world, not because of the politicians. And I really do believe that the differences we have, I don't know who's going to, somebody asked, tell them who's going to get elected. I sure don't know who's going to get elected. And that's what's going to be fun for me as a political reporter. But I do know that we have survived a lot worse than George W. Bush and John Cary, and will survive either one of those. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Thank you very much, Lynn Sweet. And we'll close it off and have you down here for anyone who wants to linger for the next few minutes with Bob Novak. Thank you.